Welcome, wandering souls and lost sailors, to the Ship of the Dead podcast.
Welcome aboard, mateys. Today, my guest captains are Mikey Gilder and Richie Gilder. They are part of the cast from the Legends of Avantris, an actual play show, and they are part of the team behind the incredible Crooked Moon, the most funded 5th edition Kickstarter of all time. Is that correct, guys?
Yeah, it is. Unbelievably.
Well, congratulations. I mean, how does that feel?
Thanks. It's wild. It's still surreal. Doesn't feel quite real yet, even though it's been a handful of months. Incredibly humbling. And just we're super grateful that folk horror resonated with so many folks.
Obviously a perfectly well-run campaign, but also perfectly timed. Like, it was right at that time of year when everyone's thinking about, Halloween and the leaves are starting to fall. So
yeah, we realized we had to make a call in like May where we, decided, hey, if we launch this thing, it has to be during Halloween. And so if we don't make it this October, we're waiting until next October. And so that was part of the reason why we sort of hit the ground running and, both quit our jobs and made it happen.
Yeah, well, I want to dive in a little later about like the actual details of, the timeline for all that and whatnot. But before we go too far about that, I want to tell a little story about like how we met, because I think you guys kind of know, but I want to reveal the full details. So like I have a booth at PAX Unplugged, right? And I'm selling Pirate Borg. My book is not even really out yet. And you guys come by and like we get a lot of people who are enthusiastic about pirates, but most are not as enthusiastic about Monkey Island as you guys were. Yeah. So I did a little sketch in your book of LeChuck, I believe. You guys still have that?
Yeah, we showed it off on stream like this week.
Oh, yes, nice.
We are number 19, I believe.
Yeah, amazing.
The Relic Edition.
Relic Edition, yeah. Over like the next few, I guess the entire year, really, I kept seeing you guys at conventions. And like, to be honest, I had no idea who you were, other than like the LeChuck guys, because that was just my context. And I don't watch a ton of live plays, And then at Gamehole Con, you guys like left the booth and someone was like, oh yeah, that was the Legends of Avantris guys. They just made, and was familiar with Crooked Moon. So I just thought that was such a cool way to meet you guys without this like guys that you're probably now experiencing of being like pseudo D&D celebrities,
It's been very interesting where, basically when we met that PAX, I think maybe 2 people recognized us.
Yeah.
If that. Yeah. And then now, getting across on Sunday of Gen Con, just going to the food trucks took like an hour and a half, just like people coming up and saying hi, which is amazing. But it's something I'm still not quite used to, but just really excited to talk to so many awesome people. I'll never forget that like we were super chill and we kind of hit it off and we were talking about Pirate Borg and we did the demo game at PAX I maybe had been maybe the next convention we were chatting and you gave us koozies from your birthday that you did in the Caribbean.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, that's so awesome that like Lou gave us these koozies that he had from his birthday. And then enter Gamehole and we're sort of both boothing for our various games. And sort of we had this realization that like, oh hey, we're both publishers now, and so it's this cool sort of full circle where now we can kind of talk business and pirates and Monkey Island. It's pretty awesome.
The next thing though that really solidified it is that we were hanging out, we met up at that bar, or ran into you guys at that circle bar at PAX Unplugged this year, and we ended up just like hanging out and talking like pirates and business till like I think like 3 or 4 in the morning, and it was like honestly it was probably my favorite moment of the entire convention just because it felt like we really were like deep diving. So I'm assuming we're going to do some more of that today,
Yeah. And that was amazing. That was actually a big highlight, I think, for both of us at PAX Unplugged. And that was awesome. And I think what was so memorable, I think when we first met you at that PAX, where it's like, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of cool games here. And then I see Pirate Borg. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. And then I'm like, and then you're like, hey, you guys want to like play a really quick demo on this giant pirate ship model? And I'm like, yes. And then like, I'm like, okay, we're going to go. And I'm like, oh, you're going to be this pirate. Like, okay, that's great. And it's like Fishman from the Deep attack. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm sold. I'll buy everything.
Oh, love that.
And then we had to sign up for the full demo that was run, and we were immediately hooked.
Who was the GM for that? Do you know?
You know what? I unfortunately can't remember the person's name. They did a really great job, though, at running Skeleton Point. I feel like we got a really quick. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, kudos to Pirate Borg, where the entire group could sit down in 2 hours. We learned the game, rolled
0
characters.
to 60, yeah.
0 to 60. Yeah, we sat down, learned the game, rolled characters, and played a full adventure. I think in 2 hours, 2.5 hours, however long was slotted, and it felt really good. I mean, I can't think of many systems where that would be possible.
Yeah, the curve, it's weird that the curve being so low and being at conventions where people like understand, there's like a common vernacular. I just think it really, really translates to convention play well.
Totally agreed.
Fun, people are laughing. We're always the loudest table in the room. People are singing shanties and stuff, Before we dive into Crooked Moon, I have a little side note today that I'm working on my next book, which is called The Dark Caribbean. And one of my New Year's resolutions has been that every work day, I draw a new NPC. That's cool. And I'm about 7 or 8 in, and every day I like shuffle. I wrote every NPC that I'm going to make on a deck of playing cards, and every day I shuffle the cards and I pull one randomly. Right.
That's awesome.
I've had a really tough week. Really, I was like going to do this Kickstarter for Zine Quest, and I was like starting to have like panic attacks from spreading myself too thin with the Dark Caribbean Kickstarter. So I bailed on that, and I was like in a really bad mood this morning, and I pulled my card, and I am not kidding you, I pulled the LeChuck card. And I was literally, I got goosebumps then. I have them now. And I was like, this is a sign just that things are going in the right direction. So he's not LeChuck, but it's like, that was the archetype that inspired. Yeah. So I digress. So welcome to the show. Before we talk about Crooked Moon, let's talk about Legends of Avantris. Because am I correct in that this book and setting are not what you guys have been streaming? Is that like kind of, you just had like the stream going and then you had this other passion project and the two are going to line up down the road. Is that correct?
So to kind of take a high level, right? So, we've been playing D&D on Twitch for over 6 years now, and we have kind of a wide variety of campaigns. One of the things that we do a little differently is instead of sort of picking one campaign and playing it until it's over, then starting a new campaign, we have anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 ongoing campaigns at any given time. And one of those campaigns that we started was this sort of vaguely, folk horror / general horror inspired campaign called Edge of Midnight. And as part of that project, the setting of Druskenvold was created. And Druskenvold is basically a pocket dimension where it's all of the tropes of Halloween biz, basically all crammed into one place. And then so we ran an adventure that took place there, and we decided that when we did our first Kickstarter campaign that we wanted to do folk horror. And we were very inspired by this, but basically it's kind of like an alternate universe version where we could basically take all of the folk horror biz and turn that up to 11. And so it's kind of a yes and no. It's inspired by our campaign Edge of Midnight, but it's very much expanded upon, fleshed out, and it stands alone in that regard.
So if you were making an elevator pitch for this, how would you explain it as different than just like Halloween Town from Nightmare Before Christmas?
The campaign or the book?
The book.
Well, the book is a folk horror tome for 5th edition. So if you want to play folk horror story, buy this book. There's plenty of games that are grimdark, that are gothic horror, that have all different types of horror, but folk horror, I think, has never really been done, at least to my knowledge. And so we wanted to basically offer all of the tools to tell a robust and comprehensive folk horror story that plays on all the themes and the archetypes that people would hopefully come to expect in such a story.
And how would you define folk horror, Mike?
Well, folk horror is one of those, broadly defined, and it's kind of nebulous. It's one of, folk horror has been around forever, but it's only been recently defined as like of the early 2000s, I think, was when folk horror started being used. If you talk about I can get nerdy about this and talk about the history, the unholy trinity of British cinema being The Wicker Man, not the Nick Cage one, the Christopher Lee one, Witchfinder General with Vincent Price, and The Blood on Satan's Claw. And kind of, those 3 films were pretty much, they were actually quite different in a lot of ways, but the through line is what a lot of, horror scholars call folk horror. And it's kind of been defined in a lot of ways. But I think that what we've really kind of latched onto is what has been called the folk horror chain, of where basically most folk horror, all folk horror, depending on how you look at it, it is a chain of features to the story that makes it folk horror, which is basically it's a rural setting with a strong focus on landscapes and nature and farming generally. And then then in that remote location, there is an isolated community. So there's people that are cut off from civilization or the cities or from just most people. And then with that isolated community comes warped morality. And a lot of times, in the originally defined like English, right? In England, it was popularized in that time of like the 70s of kind of Christianity dealing with this idea of pagan cults existing in the English countryside and that being such a scary thing. And so that's kind of the core inspiration there. And then finally, the fourth part being, with that rural landscape, with that isolated community, with those warped morals that aren't, what most people reading would expect, then there's a supernatural or a violent end.
It actually sounds very like Lovecraftian, but with different kinds of monsters.
Yeah. And so look, there are a lot of Lovecraftian stories that I would consider folk horror. I mean, I think The Shadow over Innsmouth.
Yeah, I was thinking that and Dunwich Horror both sound just like
both of them are very, very folk horror. And obviously, there is also another facet of folk horror that is part of all of this is where it's very heavily leveraging the folklore of the land, of the community, of the cultures in order to evoke that horror. But I think that the folklore kind of persists in all four steps of that folk horror chain. Deliverance, you could call folk horror.
Sure.
You could call the Texas Chainsaw Massacre folk horror, right? I think that there's a lot of different ways that people might not expect horror films or stories could be defined.
Yeah, I was thinking Pumpkinhead seems like it's right up your guys' your alley. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's the
so
kind of
if
stuff.
you had to put like a quick percentage on like number of folklore inspirations that are from real folklore and number that are coming just from your creative team, what would you put that percentage at?
What I'll say is that, like, we as Legends of Avantris, and the same things with the Crooked Moon, is we wear our influences on our sleeve. One of my favorite.
I don't know what that's like.
Yeah, I know. And I was just about to say, as one of my favorite parts about Pirate Borg, and this is honestly like before we became friends, like I would tell people, I would show the Pirate Borg like map of influences and inspirations. And I said, like, this is amazing. We should do something like this too, because like we are very, like, we love to share our influences and inspirations and say, hey, these are the archetypes that we're drawing on.
Absolutely.
What I'll say is that, I think that some people kind of go into this expecting of, oh, we're just taking this creature from folklore or this thing from folklore and putting it into D&D. That's not what we're doing. Is basically we're drawing inspiration from all kinds of folklore and myth and movies and books and all kinds of stories, and then just basically kind of re-theming them, combining them with things, re-envisioning them, and creating new creatures. So like that's, I would say, basically 100% of the creatures are that.
I would agree with that. And I think that a good example is when we first announced this project, people went crazy thinking that we were going to have tons of cryptids. And we learned that there's this huge cryptid community.
Yeah.
Folks that love Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster.
Okay, cryptids. Okay.
Yeah. Mothman, the Jersey Devil, right? So we had originally said, hey, we're not going to do cryptids, but it was so sort of persistent through our community that when we were thinking of stretch goals, we're like, hey, let's make a stretch goal that we're going to like add cryptids to the monster manual section of the book. But when we sit down and add these cryptids, we're not literally going to have a stat block that says Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster or Mothman. We're still taking the folklore of that cryptid and maybe the folklore, the realities that inspired those cryptids, and we're still making our own kind of unique monster creature.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about the actual campaign, if you will. Not the running of the campaign so much, but the things that you guys offered, because I think anybody looks at it, you're immediately blown away by just the number of SKUs. I mean, just in my quick looking at it today, you've guys got the tome. How many pages is the normal book?
At least 400. It'll probably be closer to 450.
Yeah, it's letter sized.
Yeah.
So 400 plus pages. There's a limited edition book. There's tarot cards, VTTs for Roll20, Alchemy, and Foundry. I counted 11 sets of dice, a GM screen, box sets, and miniatures. And you guys are actually printing the miniatures, right?
Yeah, we're producing the miniatures. Yep.
It's not just STL files like so many people.
No, we do offer the STL though, if you want to print it yourself. But
sure.
Yeah, we are they will all be available in plastic.
How long have you guys been working on this?
I mean, it depends sort of how you define like working on, but I mean, the ideation started started basically at the end of 2022 with the sort of first kernels, but really kind of started in earnest in like January, February, and then really hit the ground running with a lot of the sort of gloves are off, kind of let's, get this done. Let's, hire people to sort of design miniatures and work on dice, probably starting in April and May.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of been this process of the idea, then the proof of concept. Then we had to flesh that out to make sure, hey, is this a good idea? Like, can this sort of concept hold water? And then once we sold ourselves, then we realized, okay, now we have to sell our community and the broader TTRPG community. It's been a long road.
Yes, but clearly worth its weight in doubloons, if you will.
Absolutely.
So do you guys have an estimated delivery time frame?
Yeah. So we are targeting September of this year. Well, I can say this year now. And obviously, with a lot of the 5e Kickstarters, there's been, all sorts of crazy delays that have hit them and, to the point of delivering 1 to 2 years late. And so obviously anything could happen. This industry in general, and especially when you're shipping things overseas and producing so many SKUs that we have, we are very mindful that this is our first rodeo, and wherever we stumble, we're going to learn from, and we're going to sort of do the best we can to deliver on time. So we're trying our best to hit September 2024, and that's our current plan.
I have my own horror stories, as we all know, but I've heard horror stories. Exalted Funeral was telling me about a Kickstarter that they wouldn't take in through customs because it didn't say what country it was made in on the outside of the packaging. And they had to pay the import company to unpackage and sticker every single book. You never know what kind of stuff is going to slow you down,
Yes, I've heard of issues because of that. And, there's things like in Australia, if there's any kind of wood product, it has to be fumigated for weevils or something.
Yeah. Whoa, really?
And so, and there's all these specific, and I think in certain countries in Europe, things can be that are a choke hazard. You literally can't import. And so,
us selling plushies, we need to make sure that our plushies are safe for children, because even if we say they're a collector's item for adults, in the UK, I believe there's a regulation or a law that says any plush toy, no matter what you say the intention is a toy for children. So it needs to be manufactured. So we need to be thinking about international laws across the board. And that's one of the reasons why we've brought on the legendary Elisa Teague to basically serve as the producer on the book. And so, obviously after the immense support for the Crooked Moon, we doubled down even more about making it the best product that it can be. And so, we've brought in the big guns from the industry to really help us make sure that it's the best product it can be and it delivers as quickly as it can be.
Excellent. I can't wait to see it. Before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about the art, because the art I've seen so far is fantastic. Can you guys talk a little bit about the art direction process and who you've been working with and what kind of pitches you've been giving them, how much direction, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I am the art director on the book, and it's been an amazing process to work with so many great artists. And frankly, it doesn't sound like this romantic, sexy process, because it basically started, I was the first one that went full time. And so basically I was the only one that really had any kind of bandwidth to be putting every single day into this. And it just started with me on ArtStation searching people. And I just would find people on ArtStation or Twitter, or Instagram. And I would just say, hey, they're really neat. I'm going to email them. And then basically at a point by May or probably beginning of June, I had a roster of a bunch of different artists, understanding that the style was very different. Maybe it's mental gymnastics, but my thought process was that the idea is that, the whole idea of folklore is that it's told in different ways by different people, and that changes it. And so the different art styles kind of represent that there can be a variety of art styles. And so I just wanted all of the artists to really lean hard into their style that makes them unique. And I think they did an amazing job. And, if you want to get into the nitty gritty, right? I had a very clear vision about what I wanted this to look like, about the overarching story, about the overarching world. And I think that I tried to not be too prescriptive, to allow them to give, as long as they were hitting like the general theme and all of the things that were important to quote unquote canon, to let them kind of flex and do their own research and come up with really awesome ideas. And so, we worked with a lot of really amazing artists. Holly Lucero and Carl Fitzgerald are two artists you can see in their work where they basically would do their own research and come up with ideas that I didn't think about. For instance, our cryptids, our very first cryptid, we had to go with, our Maryland pride with the local Frederick, Maryland snallygaster. And for Holly, I just say, hey, we want to have a snallygaster that feels folk horror-y. Send me some options. And she came up with ideas of like these monstrous, this cryptid. But imagine on what she gave me an option for like that was like an American turkey that kind of had like this over the garden wall inspired, very Americana vibe. And then she gave me like a seagull albatross version inspired by The Lighthouse, the film The Lighthouse, and kind of like nautical folklore. And like that was the level of collaboration of where like they have these amazing ideas. Our Loch Ness monster that she also just finished, where she was like, oh, well, a lot of people think that sea monsters came from like washed up whale carcasses that look grotesque.
And
and basically the inspiration from that was covered in like kelp and seaweed and it's kind of decaying, and it's like basically like a Loch Ness monster, but it kind of is looking like this decaying whale carcass. And so like that's the level of collaboration that I'd have with the artists. And then also working with another amazing studio, Humble Squid Creatives. They're based out of the Philippines. Just working with that team was how we were able to sprint so hard, so fast on so many. That's how we got the animated trailer done, basically because there was a full team that we were able to work with that was able to have kind of that unified painterly Dungeons and Dragons style. And that was the only reason why we were able to execute in September, October.
Yeah, I was going to say, despite the different artists and maybe their different styles, there's still a consistent level of quality.
Yeah.
Some, I guess I could say indie level books will have like, oh, well, there's a bunch of art from this one guy, but it totally doesn't gel. And I think that's not the case with the art I've seen for Crooked Moon so far.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I mean, that was the intention, right? The idea that even if the styles are different, because we're all marching to the same beat of the drum of basically folk horror, of this vibe that like it all, hopefully, and I think it does all fit, right? Where it feels like it all can all live in the same universe, even though they're all different artists and it's all different styles. And so that was always my favorite part. And, I think that we definitely have very high standards for ourselves, I would say.
And I think that's for not just this project, but in general, like our business and our channel. Like we have this bar that we set for ourselves, and everything that we put out or produce, it needs to hit this bar.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, we redo it. We have it redone. And throughout this process, we have had art pieces totally redone, miniatures resculpted, and we'll invest the extra money to basically totally redo things if it doesn't meet our standard. And so it's that sort of level of commitment that we think, hopefully gives that consistent vibe of like, okay, everything is sort of up here and everything feels like it goes together.
And I think that comes from like our philosophy, at least my philosophy as an art director, and like also kind of as a business partner in deciding what our offerings are, is like, and maybe it's foolish we talk about like so many SKUs, is like we came at it of like, as a consumer, what would I want to see?
Yep.
Yeah.
If I'm looking at a book, it's one of the things of where I think about Pirate Borg, of where it was the art, it was the whole presentation, and it was all the decisions that you made. Me as a consumer, I'm like, oh my God, I'm all in immediately.
Yeah, I think that both of our projects, and this is maybe a little boasting for both of us, but I think that we can tell as creators that we're the kind of creators that are making the things we wished existed in the world, as opposed to the kinds of creators who are just like, maybe they had that vision at one point, or they're churning out a product just to get it, it's this quarter's release. And clearly that's how neither of us operate, both as creators and as business people.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's like that sort of trite saying of like, for gamers by gamers, right?
But that's important though. That's how, how can you make a good role-playing game if you don't know what a good role-playing game is?
Totally. And so, for that will be our philosophy, for every product we put out, is that it's something that we want to do. And, to your point, it's what we're passionate about, right? And clearly with your work, you're super passionate about the setting and pirates and all of this nautical stuff. And, I think for both of us, we aren't the kind of publisher that's like, well, let's do market research and what's popular. Superheroes are really in right now. Let's make a superhero book, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
We're not making books just to sell books.
Yeah. I kind of come from the like Steve Jobs school of thought, which is like the consumer doesn't know what they want yet until you give it to them. And that's, obviously not totally true, but it's kind of like, well, pirates aren't big right now, but you know what? I'm going to make them big. That's kind of, and you guys are kind of the same way. It's like, there's not a big Halloween vibe right now, but hey, we're going that route, folklore, excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah. And we could not believe that when we sort of took a look at the market at the end of 2022, that like there wasn't really kind of a major folk horror 5th edition supplement.
Yeah.
There were so many horror supplements, so many gothic horror supplements, and just general grim, dark fantasy, dark fairy tale. And so we sort of saw the opportunity that like, hey, even if people don't know what folk horror is, like their brain does.
Sure. Well, and I think it's pretty obvious that people are into that. It's more on the gothic side, but with the popularity of Curse of Strahd, how could they have not gone further down a folklore route,
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where it's because I think like, I monologue nerdily about like folk horror, where I think that maybe it's one of those things where because it's so like nebulously defined and like, there are scholars about it that have like different takes on it, and it requires a level of synthesis in order to present it to 5th edition where it's not as obvious. And we, I think, subscribe to the same kind of Steve Jobs idea of where like, the audience or the customer might not know what they want until we present it to them. We kind of had that idea of where like, I don't know if anyone was clamoring for folk horror. I don't know if they were like demanding folk horror, but we said, you know what? You don't know that you want this yet, and you may not even know what folk horror is, but when we present to you the Crooked Moon, you'll know what folk horror is and you're going to want it.
100%. And I think you guys have kind of taken a page out of Matthew Lillard's book with Beetle and Grimm as like, hey, these modules are cool. I'm talking about normal D&D. These normal D&D modules are great, but like I want all the things and I don't have enough time to like make the handouts and, get dice that match and like do a big elaborate box set. Well, that's what Beetle and Grimm does. And you guys are doing that for your own game. It's like, hey, why not get it from the guys who came up with the genesis of the setting, get them to make all the extra little tidbits to add in,
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I think that was part of why we decided, as content creators, there's a fork in the road where we had to decide, do we sort of just go to a publisher, pitch this idea and like just get attached to a project and they're the ones that kind of do it and we're the face and we're selling it and, there's some sort of royalty deal or whatever, right? Or do we just do this ourselves? And we had kind of made a decision one day like, hey, we want to do this because exactly to your point, we felt like there was value in it coming directly from us and that we are the ones, we have full creative control and that we're not sort of signing anything over and kind of setting it off to sea, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who do make that decision are doing it out of, sometimes it's fear-based, sometimes it's just time-based. Like, hey, I don't know how to get a book into distribution. So rather than taking the time to learn that, I'm going to focus on making more products. And I think that you're actually serving the customer pipeline better if you take the time to learn all those skills. Like in 5-10 years, you guys are going to be like one of those publishers that has the big booths in the front of one of these conventions,
That's the hope.
Yeah, you'll have learned all these skills that people who just make RPGs haven't taken the time to learn. And as a result, you'll be, like I said, funneling down that experience to people, soup to nuts, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, our sort of vision, right? Is that, well, hey, Mike and I we were both working at these, corporate jobs, making, good money, in a steady, comfortable job that we could have done for the next, 3 decades or whatever, collecting a paycheck. But we looked at each other and we're like, do we sort of sell this off to somebody or, do we want to do this for the rest of our lives? And if this is what we want to do with our lives, we need to learn it, right? And we might screw up, we might fail.
And we will, and we have.
And we will, and we have. We've made a lot of mistakes. We're going to make a lot more mistakes.
Wait, you guys have screwed up? What's that like?
It's illuminating.
Yeah, you should try it sometime.
Oh, I've tried it. Don't believe me.
Yeah, so we decided like, hey, we're going to accept that we don't know this, but that we are going to take the time to learn. We're going to take that leap of faith and quit our sort of comfortable jobs so that we have the bandwidth to kind of learn it and do it. And, we're still learning stuff every single day and it's been, nonstop. And I'm sure even 10 years from now, there's stuff that we're going to learn.
Absolutely.
And I think about the ideas, we also kind of had a long look at each other. It's like, do we just want to be content creators forever and just content creators?
Right.
And we want to keep making content, but I think the idea is that we also want to just make games, right?
But to be clear though, you mean content creators like on Twitch and YouTube?
Yes. Yeah. Like YouTube, obviously we're not just streamers. We're not just YouTubers. It's across the board, right? We're not just podcasters.
But you're saying you had to make the decision of whether you were going to make a physical product or not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Like we need to decide, like, do we want to be a game publishing company? Like, do we want to try to be, like you said, be one of those companies that has the big booth in the convention? And I think back to when we were teenagers, we had dreams of making a board game company because we hadn't like gotten into TTRPGs yet at that time. But or I guess we tried to get into D&D. It was 3.5 and my 12-year-old brain fried trying to read the rule book and I couldn't process it. So I'm like, well, I'm too stupid to play D&D. But we had dreams back when we were young, basically start a board game company. And then we, what is it, Rush? We lost our race to rats and got our corporate jobs. Then we kind of came full circle back to this. And, it was a dream that I think most of us here on the team have always had. And so we said, you know what, why not live the life that we've wanted to? And it's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and it's been painful and a lot of mistakes, and we're going to keep making mistakes, but it's been so worth it. Like you said, it's taking the time, taking it on the chin and learning it so that we are then able to do more, to make cooler games, to do cooler stuff, and we'll be able to eventually, hopefully, do it in our slate.
Absolutely. I think I might have told you about this book I was reading. I have a book that is really going to help you guys, I think. It's called The E-Myth Solution.
Yes.
The sentence that you just said is like literally what that book is about. Like how to make the company work without you so that you can do whatever you want for the company, that kind of thing.
I literally finished listening to the E-Myth Solution like a month ago.
Oh, you listened to it? Okay, great.
I listened to it. Yeah, it's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. I totally agree. And E-Myth is like, it stands for the entrepreneurial myth, right?
Yes.
For folks that haven't read it. And a lot of folks that sort of start a business, they build themselves a job.
Yeah.
And that you have to sort of build a business for it to exist without you in it almost. Mm-hmm. There is a lesson about letting go that entrepreneurs have to go through. And we've had to do that in various places.
Dude,
we can't do it all.
There are a couple of sentences in that book that like hurt to hear.
Yes.
With like, when he's talking about like being the technician versus the entrepreneur, I'm like, oh man, this hurts too bad. This hurts too much. Yeah.
Yep.
That's been, I think, a learning experience for all of us. It's where, we've had to, over the past like couple months after the Crooked Moon, was a success. We were always hoping it would be a success, but never in our wildest dreams do we think it would be to the level of the success. And we were always committed to the quality, but like the duty that we have to our backers and our customers just ramped up so much more and more and more. Where it got to the point of like, we've never written a 5e supplement before. Like we've never done it. Like we could do it ourselves and it could probably get like super delayed or whatever it is. And like we could make all the mistakes, but then we kind of had a long look at ourselves as like, can we just learn to let go and start bringing on like world-class talent so we can kind of, as long as it reaches that Avantris, seal of quality and it stays true to the spirit of the Crooked Moon, we have to learn how to let go so we can basically build the business and grow it and do the things that we need to do so we don't hold ourselves back acting as technicians.
And E-Myth talks about the 3 roles in a business: the entrepreneur, the manager, and the technician. And for the folks at home, the technician is just like the person that's actually doing the job, right? And for me personally, my role in this sort of business project fan thing, when we first started back in 2017, for 5 years straight, I was the technician to the point where I was the videographer, I was the audio engineer, I was the video editor, I was the graphic designer, I was the stream engineer, right? Like I just learned to do everything because that's what you have to do, right? When you don't have a sort of business built to support it. And now I don't do any of those things pretty much. Right. Yeah. And so it definitely can be bittersweet in ways, but if you let go of those things, then you can focus on the vision. You can focus on what's next. You can focus on steering the ship.
Yeah, sure. My dad got me a copy of Creativity Inc. for Christmas, which is the CEO of Pixar. I'm about halfway through it and it's the same kind of thing. He talks a lot about like wanting to get into the animation industry, wanting to make the first computer animated movie and getting rejected and then, meeting Steve Jobs and then like having movies work with John Lasseter and then fail with other people and having to like build a team. So another good.
I'll check that out.
Yeah, business.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. Sorry, we digressed there totally off RPGs for a second, but sometimes you got it, right? Let's pivot because we talked briefly about Matthew Lillard. I want to talk about the Rings of Chaos kind of promo stream that you guys did because found out that you used one of my maps kind of / adventures, which I thought was really cool. And Matthew Lillard, what a cool dude, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about this event, if you will.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was something where, we still aren't used to anyone knowing who the hell we are, but it was at Gamehole Con where I think was the first time people actually knew of us and knew who we were. So we show up, we're really not ready. We were focusing on the Kickstarter. It was mid-October. We were exhausted and run down, and we get there and we get to the party on the night before the convention starts.
Night zero.
Yeah,
Wednesday night.
And didn't even look to see who it was sponsored by, but it was sponsored by Beetle and Grimm's. And I show up to this thing, and at the door giving out drink tickets is Matthew Lillard. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't expect that. He was just a chill dude just hanging out with everybody. And so we go in, we hang out, we're chatting. And then eventually, they're talking about their Kickstarter that's launching. They're talking about the Ring of Chaos. And then eventually he comes over, and our layout artist is the same one. Gordon McAlpin is the same artist that they use. And so he said like, hey, the Crooked Moon guys are here. You should talk to them. So he comes over, we chat for a while, and he was like blown away by the Crooked Moon. He was so excited. He was so enthusiastic, and we just really hit it off and like hung out and just really had a good vibe and a good energy. And he was immediately like, hey, we gotta play D&D. Like, let's talk. Like, let's do this.
Hell yeah.
And we were like, yeah, sure. And so we were thinking like down the line, maybe eventually he'll reach out. Like, we didn't realize that he was serious.
It was like the next week though, right?
Yeah, it was. So we met him at Gamehole Con, which was mid-October. We were mid-campaign.
Yeah.
We were exhausted, beat. We all got really sick, and because our immune systems were trashed. So at Gamehole Con, we said, hey, let's play D&D together at some point. Let's just have a meeting. Let's just jump on a Zoom call right after the campaign is done. So the campaign ends on a Wednesday. And then the next day, we had a Zoom call with Matthew Lillard on a Thursday. And then, we're like, okay, let's just talk about, the future, D&D, just sort of, how we think we can kind of like work with each other. And he's like, are you guys free next Thursday? And he had happened to be filming a movie or a show on the East Coast. And he said that he could change his flights to DC, which is where we're located, and come to our studio, which is just in the loft of our townhouse, and play D&D with us. And, we were exhausted from the campaign, but that's not an opportunity you pass up. So
no,
we're
of course
like,
not.
100%, let's do it. So we had given ourselves a little like stream vacation from making content the week after the campaign ended, but that sort of ended up being the let's prep for Matthew Lillard week.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
And so he shows up, and we just like, we got pizza, and we were just and wings. And so it was very chill. We hung out for like over an hour when he got here, and then we played some D&D. And, the idea is that, so like I built the one shot, and, Ring of Chaos has a lot of like fun, exciting fluff, but there isn't a ton of lore to it, right? There isn't a ton. And so like, oh, well, there's the Temple of Chaos. Okay. So I took the Temple of Chaos. We got to use the map of the board game as the final showdown dungeon map. We'll do that, but we need like a full temple like adventure. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, where am I going to find map of a temple adventure? And I'm like, oh, duh. Luke absolutely has a temple, and you did. And so,
well, I thought it was really cool that you took the different rooms from the battle map, and then you like cut them out, printed them, and pasted them on like little cardboard pieces so that you can like, this is such a big problem when you're running a battle map dungeon crawl. Like, how do you figure out how to reveal it to your players? Do you get like post-it notes, or you cut it up? And I thought that idea of like pasting them onto little cardboard pieces and dropping them when they're in the next room was perfect.
Yeah, I did a little arts and crafts project and glued all the different rooms to foam core board.
Foam core, yeah.
And it's sort of, it's sort of like those map reveal board games, like a Betrayal at House on the Hill, where you're like, you flip room tiles and you connect it. And so I'm like, you know what? How do we make this sort of, instead of having fog of war all over the place, trying to block rooms with construction paper, like, let's just build it as we go.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it. It actually kind of reminds me, now that we're saying it, have you guys played the like second edition of Mansions of Madness? Because that's exactly what it is. It's like, maybe it knows, maybe it's not random, maybe the computer knows what it's going to show you, but it only shows you the room that you've just discovered. Very, very cool idea.
We learned how to do that. We learned to do that in our campaigns that we played, where like when we had some dungeon delves of like, it was so much easier and elegant than like having the fog of war. Sometimes we like would make stickers to like literally tape it down and then peel off to reveal the fog of war. And it's just so much easier to just glue it to a piece of something. And
the thing too, clearly for obvious reasons, I'm not playing as much 5e as I once was. We're doing a lot more, like I've got like Thursday night, actually I have tonight, my Dark Caribbean playtest group. And I've really struggled because I'm a visual DM. Obviously, I'm an artist and I draw a lot of maps, but like, how do I show this to these guys? Now, luckily, we're playing with a TV. We're at like a D&D kind of restaurant thing where they have TVs built into the tables, you know. But like, that's a real problem if you don't want to use technology, but you do want to use these like kind of new modern 1 inches 5 feet battle maps. Hats off to that solution. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and we're sort of lucky that just in kind of our crafting past, we have this just gigantic printer that can print on like 17 by 11, you know, super high DPI imagery. And like, but it, I mean, to your point, like just to print maps just for the average gamer, like color ink is expensive,
really,
right?
Oh my God, so much.
And, you know, high quality cardstock is expensive. Just being able to kind of pull that all together without buying it somewhere is really hard to do. So, I mean, most of the time, you know, 90% of the time, we have just a Chessex dry erase battle map that we've been using for 7 years or 8 years, and we just dry erase on that. But, you know, one of the reasons why we're offering a battle map pack, or a tactical map pack in the Crooked Moon is for our boss fights, we want this cool, bespoke, beautifully illustrated battle map.
So my big thing that I've really gotten into, I'm calling it art directed theater of the mind. And because I feel like, especially with the kind of games I've been running lately, like Pirate Borg, there's this way to play where you're not on the grid. You know, it feels a little less like a video game. But by having a battle map book like that, like they don't have to put minis down for them to look at that map and get inspired. You know, and that's one of the things I love about those at the table visual aids.
Yeah, and it was a blast. And honestly, obviously your art is really, really awesome and beautiful. So it really helped kind of tie the whole experience together and made it like, you know, it made it feel very special. And so I was able to basically build the adventure around what you had already done in that. I'm forgetting the name of the adventure.
It's
I'm
called
sorry.
The Lost Tomb of Chewin Khan. It predates Pirate Borg, but it's very much like I took all my love for Indiana Jones and like Mayan history and put it into a D&D adventure. Yeah.
It was awesome. And so like, you know, the dungeon that you made was very inspirational for me as I put together that one shot. So
great. Well, thank you for using my stuff, guys.
Yeah, of course.
I guess with that in mind, I want to talk about, I guess for me, the main event, because that's how I'm wired. Let's talk about Shroud over Saltmarsh. Am I correct in that this is your new campaign that's for patrons only? Is that correct?
Yes. So we just had our session 0 on Monday.
Oh, yeah.
And this has been a long time. I mean, I could talk about the history of it, but this has been a long time coming. I've been like thinking about doing a nautical coastal campaign since 2020. I started working on this.
Yep.
And obviously COVID kind of put a wrench into everything. We decided that we wanted to have a Patreon exclusive campaign. And so basically we assembled a group. Basically it's the 4 of us. It's me, Richie, and then Derek and Andy on our team playing. And it's available. We're going to do it weekly on Mondays. And the first episode will be on YouTube, but everything else will be only on Patreon.
You got to paywall them.
Yep.
I love it. I was watching your session 0 stuff, and I love that you're just trashing on the Saltmarsh module because it's so accurate. Like it's like WotC was like, "Hey, we need a pirate book. Hey, didn't we already do this? Go to the filing cabinet and we'll put a new coat of paint on it and stick it together." But there's nothing where you're fighting with ships. Like you're not playing as pirates in that thing. It's ridiculous.
Yep. And so that was the thing, is we're like, there is a lot of like good inspiration in there.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
And the original adventures, like for the time, like, you know, they were great. The trilogy of, what is it? Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh, Danger of Dunwater, and The Final Enemy. They're all very classic, but it's one of those things where I was stunned when I read through the book. And by updating it, they just mean like just updating the rules for 5th edition.
Like the numbers.
Yeah.
I felt like, you know, if you look at the like mecha era of D&D 5e, it's like Curse of Strahd in through Tomb of Annihilation, where they're like, hey, we're going to take this old idea and we're going to put our best people on it for a year or two, and then we're going to give it to you. And when they announced Saltmarsh, based on the marketing and the art, you assume that's what they were doing. Yeah. But then you look at it and you're like, oh, this is like Tales from the Yawning Portal, but like doesn't do the thing. You know, like if Chris Perkins had been like, I'm going to write a pirate adventure for 2 years, that thing would be amazing. I probably would either have way less patrons or way more based on like how well they did at it, you know, because if they had done ship combat, then maybe, you know, we would have ship combat for 5e.
Could you imagine if Curse of Strahd was just Ravenloft with like updated numbers?
Yeah, exactly. It wouldn't have worked.
Nearly the beloved module that it is today.
No, what works, the difference between Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft is Chris Perkins's like love. You know, that's the difference. And I think that was the disappointing part as a fan of D&D at the time. But, you know, whatever, right? I guess with that in mind, though, like what kind of things are you planning as a GM to like add in? I heard you mention in the stream, obviously our listeners haven't seen the Session Zero stream, but like what kind of things are you adding to the campaign to help it feel more like that book should have been?
So, you know, basically, as I mentioned on our Patreon or Session Zero, or basically I'm taking the book Ghost of Saltmarsh and I basically ingested it and just nuked it into Lego pieces and am building up a brand new adventure that is effectively a homebrew campaign that just has like loose inspiration, and like the name Saltmarsh is the same. Basically.
Yeah, of course. We do have to market ourselves, right?
Well, exactly right. Exactly right. And the idea being, right, there will be a hub of Saltmarsh, right? And there will be factions at play, and there will be nautical dangers, and all 8 of the adventures that are included, there will be a spiritual nod to all of them.
Oh, nice. Nice.
And inspiration in some ways, where I think the discerning viewers will be able to, I see. This is kind of like the nod to the final enemy, something like that, right?
Yeah.
This is the nod to the styes, you know.
There are some good parts in the appendix too. I found some of the, I mean, you know, WotC doesn't do tables like the OSR does tables, but I think some of that appendix is actually a good intro into like the Kraken graveyard. I love that idea. So there's some gold in that book.
So a lot of that stuff I'm going to be drawing inspiration from. Like, oh, well, you know, and so a lot of the stuff from the appendix, right?
Yeah.
The way that they kind of like talk about, building islands or building shipwrecks or building weather effects, definitely going to be incorporating and drawing inspiration, right? Drawing inspiration from like, they have a couple of crews of pirates that are kind of like goofy and high fantasy, drawing some inspiration from that and kind of retooling it and resynthesizing it.
Is it in Faerun?
No. So it takes place in Avantris.
Oh, okay,
so basically a homebrew version of Saltmarsh. It's going to be, you know, a lot of world building outside. You know, I think it takes place in the original adventure of a medieval kingdom that is mostly inland. This is going to take place on an island
it's like a
nation.
landlocked nation in the original book, and like that's why Saltmarsh is valuable or something.
Yeah, it's just along the coast, and so you know it's going to be kind of a different vibe. Where I think Saltmarsh in the original book is more of kind of like a backwater town, relatively, and then Saltmarsh in this is going to basically be a burgeoning trade city. Like basically it's experiencing kind of a renaissance of growth.
Can you give us some of the keystone differences between like say Faerun and Avantris?
So the big thing about Avantris is when I went to creating it, I didn't want to have to hand someone a 10-page novella about how my setting is different.
Yeah, of course.
It's basically all of the classic trappings that you would expect in Faerun or any classic D&D setting effectively is the same thing in Avantris. You know, the stuff in the general 5e rule books is basically kind of similarly how it works. You know, there's
same level of magic systems and classes and whatnot, mostly.
Yep. It's just like different, you know, as far as like how the world works. And, you know, some races might be like slightly different, like our Aasimar and our tieflings can't just look like a pretty human or a human with horns. They look like devil people or angel people.
Sure.
You know, besides that, though, it's not like super crazy different.
I would say, though, that with Avantris, we're okay with anachronism.
Yes.
I think a lot more than many D&D settings and groups. And so we're happy to have like a Victorian city over here and like a 1920s steampunk city over here.
Yeah.
And a medieval kingdom over here and a Magitech train over here, right? So we just like theme, and there's lots of different themes that feel fantastical to us.
Yeah.
That pull on a lot of different time periods and reference different time periods in history. And so, you know, Avantris sort of frees us up to touch on all of those themes in a fantastical way without having to limit, pianos wouldn't exist because that's post-medieval, right? Or potatoes wouldn't exist or whatever it is. So
yeah, I get this a lot with different animals or, you know, often fruits. Like if I put a fruit in the Dark Caribbean, sometimes I'm like, wait, no, that fruit isn't there. It was imported later. But you know what? It's a fantasy setting, right? You got to just follow your creative heart, I guess.
Hell yeah, 100%.
Okay, so another thing that obviously is very cool to me, which actually previews something that I'm working on later this year, is that you guys actually ran Curse of Skeleton Point in your session 0, but you ran it in 5th edition. Like I have only got to watch maybe the first 30 or 40 minutes because it's been chaos over here. But tell me, how did it go?
It went incredibly well, shockingly well, and much better than I was like expecting. And it's not at all a comment on Curse of Skeleton Point. It's because basically we had an idea. We were going to play our session 0, but it was going to be like a canonical story that took place in the world of this, basically setting up the intro and setting up the party dynamics. But on the day of the session, one of our players tested positive for COVID.
Oh, no.
And
as we do.
I found out 3 hours before we were going to stream. And so I'm like, oh my God, what the hell am I going to do? And I'd already had the pirate board.
Do you say that because like all your balance is off, or were you going to run? You decided you needed to run something different because of that?
Yeah, we had to run something different because basically without his character, we wanted to if we wanted to have something that was kind of canon and setting up the story.
Oh yeah, you don't want to start the campaign. I gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Episode 1, being a man down is tough.
Yeah. And so I'd already had the Pirate Borg book out and the Limithron Guide to Naval Combat because, I forgot to mention also, maybe to segue back, is that a big difference about this campaign is we will not be using the nautical rules of Ghosts of Saltmarsh. We will be using the Limithron 5th edition nautical rules.
This is why we're friends.
Yeah. And so that was never in question. But basically, so I'd had the Pirate Borg book out because I'm using a lot of inspiration. I'm drawing a lot of inspiration from it. Not only do I wear my reference on my sleeve, I also got permission from Luke to draw as much as I want.
That's easy permission to get, but yeah.
Appreciate that. And so I'm like, what do I do? And I had just the idea on a lark to just say, what if I just ran Curse of Skeleton Point? I can skim it and because I played through a version of it. So, that helped.
Yeah,
and then
sure.
I read it and it's so tightly done and tightly written that I was able to just kind of take a look and then improvise. And anything that I needed to know, I could just look at when I got there.
Yeah.
And quickly look at it and make the decisions on the fly. And it worked out astoundingly well. I mean, Rich, you were a player, so I don't want to basically toot my own horn as a DM. But
I can share my experience because this is actually the second time I've run this adventure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because the first time I ran this was in the demo game at PAX Unplugged 2022 or 2021, whatever that was.
Yeah.
So 100%. It was awesome. It was so much fun. And it never felt like it slowed down. And it truly felt like whatever we did, there was an answer for it. We could have gone anywhere on that island. I'm actually looking at the map of the island.
Yes, you pretty much can. Yeah. There's so many places to go. Yeah.
And so the first time that we did this at the convention, we started at the tavern and then we went into the jungle and met
swamp
and into the swamp and met the witch in the woods.
Oh yeah.
And bartered with, we got some spells and magical items from her. And then we went to the castle and went up to the top of the castle and defeated the Baron. And then in this version, we started at the tavern and then we went to the church and had a zombie encounter there. And then we went to the lighthouse and went under the lighthouse and encountered the governor and had the final showdown with the governor / like shadow demon that he was sort of summoning. And it was just, there were two entirely different adventures, all from the same adventure. Was just so cool and so thematic. And
awesome.
I'm sure I could run this like 5 more times.
You didn't even go to the temple, the 3-level temple.
No.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, Mikey, can you share, we've had a lot of people convert 5e or other supplements to Pirate Borg, but I haven't heard a ton of it going the other direction. Can you share how that process was? Were you just pulling stat blocks as you needed them? How much prep was there for that?
So I know I said that I bought everything when we first discovered Pirate Borg. I meant we bought everything. So I had on hand the Pirate Borg 5e bestiary.
But even though that doesn't have stats for the Baron, does it?
No, it doesn't. No, it does not. It does not have it for the NPC. So I made it up. And so basically what I did is I knew that I was going to basically have to completely improvise. And so, I think basically I just had some human living pirates. And for those, I just used the skeleton henchmen
Oh, perfect.
Oh my God, what was it called? Yeah, like the base,
like the rank and vial.
Yep, the rank and vial skeleton stat block from that book. And then when they kind of were risen as zombies, just like kind of generic zombies, I used the baseline ghost pirate, but I didn't make them incorporeal. And then, there were stats for the shadow demon in the lighthouse section of the pirate Borg, but not in the bestiary. So I just pulled the shadow demon from 5e.
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't care how powerful this is. I'm just pulling it.
Well, and that's one of our cornerstones is that like the power balance thing isn't necessarily more fun. So it's kind of fun to just be like, well, maybe this will kill them. They're gonna have to run away,
Yeah, and it was something that was very easy to convert, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because obviously I've been, playing a ton of D&D 5e since 2015.
Yeah.
And so that's just something that, I've had the reps. Also, because of the freedom and the flexibility of Pirate Borg, it's something that was very easy for me to there was never a question of oh, well, what check would that be? Oh, well, how would I flavor, this stat block? And basically it all just kind of came up to well, how does the resurrection curse on Black Coral Bay, right? Is that the name of it? Yeah,
that's the island.
Yeah, Black Coral Bay. How does that work? And I'm like, well, whatever makes the most cinematic experience. To me, it was really, really easy to pick up and just thumb through and make the decision on the fly. And what I thought was really cool was the D10, the 1 in 10 chance of this happening, and the 1 in 10 chance of this happening, which we actually used in order to basically determine when the Baron or the governor, with the governor showing up, and whether where he would be, and that really helped determine the nature of the adventure. And so it was honestly really effortless for me.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
And honestly, I don't think I would have been able to run. I think if I had read a 5e adventure, it would have been a million pages with tons of rules and tons of things and all this stuff. And I'm like, I need a bullet point, baby.
Yeah, and likely linear in its progression. Yeah.
Yeah.
This makes me wonder, though. I mean, do you ever think about, and I don't mean Pirate Borg, just in general, do you consider running other systems on the show? Have you thought about running Call of Cthulhu or Pathfinder, or are you guys like 5e for life?
It's funny you mentioned that. So we get this question a lot from our fans that like sort of our style of role play, but maybe aren't super into D&D or just want to see us sort of branch out. And our answer always was sort of like, hey, we like D&D. It's what we play. We did dabble in PBTA a little bit, and that wasn't a great fit for our table.
That's Powered by the Apocalypse. Yeah.
Yes. Powered by the Apocalypse.
So not enough rules. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And with us sort of discovering Pirate Borg, we're like, well, man, there's some really cool other systems out there that we would love to play. But with sort of our streaming schedule and everything else, it's hard to kind of learn a brand new system and dive in and teach a whole table of players. And so our philosophy was always kind of like, maybe one day.
Sure.
But kind of recently, we sort of had a reason, and I can't say too much more than that, but a reason to pick up and read the rules and try the Warhammer Fantasy role-playing system.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And we've had a single session.
Yeah.
We rolled our characters totally randomly.
I'm assuming 4th edition, right?
Yes, 4th edition.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cubicle 7.
Yep, Cubicle 7. And it was an absolute hoot. It was actually my first time ever GMing anything ever.
Oh, wow.
And, we were messing around with it, but we played it just to see if we thought that it could work. And it really did. And we had a ton of fun.
That's and
we felt like with sort of the four of us, the same folks that are in the Saltmarsh campaign, can we make content in a system that's not D&D? And I think we definitely proved that.
The answer was yes. It was basically a test. Our hypothesis was that hey, we can potentially play other systems. And if the four of us all commit to it, we only need the four of us, and we can basically learn a system and have a hoot doing it.
Yeah. And so our short list, right? It's Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing, it's Pirate Borg, it's Call of Cthulhu, Cyberpunk Red, just off the top of my head, right?
Yeah.
Like our systems we'd love to learn and play.
Sure.
And how much we can play each of everything, right? Like 5e will probably always be the core of the channel, but I can definitely see us branching off in either one-shots or like mini-series or Patreon stuff. Who knows?
Yeah. And I really loved the D100 system. I wasn't sure how much, because in another life, we were going to try to play Call of Cthulhu. for like a little mini thing. And so I learned, I studied the rules, but we never played it. And so this was our first time actually playing a D100 system, and it really worked.
I love that. It's exciting news for a couple of reasons. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is like, I don't know if you guys get this, but like I get like RPG crushes where like I don't own that book yet, but like maybe it should be in my library. And like all editions of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay are in that category, except for third, because I got it during our White Kraken gift exchange this year.
Wow. Third edition. Interesting. That's the Fantasy Flight one?
It is wild. It's Fantasy Flight. There are weird dice. There are cards for everything. It is intense. It's very
board gamey. I think
the opposite of the OSR, but I've been enjoying going through it all. You know, have you checked out Mothership at all?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so Mothership, get ready because Mothership is absolutely incredible. They're still waiting to like fulfill their Kickstarter for first edition, but you can get 0 edition, and it's D100 based sci-fi horror. Basically, like think Alien, but like not Aliens, Alien. You know?
Wow. Oh yeah.
Really, like some of the best design. You'll recognize some of the design tricks in there because I stole them like a true pirate.
Is that the one, or was it a different one that you were playing at Gamehole Con that you were telling us about?
Oh, no, I haven't played a ton of Mothership, but I've digested a ton of it. We actually ran an Orkborg at Gamehole.
That's right.
Which is like, awesome. It's like 40K space orcs. You're on like a space Hulk. That was
that's incredible.
Too. Yeah, so much fun. Interesting. Not to critique it too much, but that's like a pretty thin zine. And I actually really found, having been so used to using all the tables in Pirate Borg when I'm making stuff up, that I really missed having that content. So I would not recommend running a system that doesn't, like, if you're just going to make it up, you got to have that stuff to back you up,
Hold fast, wretched sailor. We brace for the broadside barrage.
First RPG system you ever played?
D&D 3.5.
Yeah.
Most recent system that you've played?
Pirate Borg.
RPG that you haven't played but would like to try?
Call of Cthulhu. Yeah.
Favorite edition of D&D besides 5th edition?
3.5 is all I know. No, what I will say is that I understand the flaws of 4th edition, but there actually is some good in there that gets, I think, a lot of unnecessary hate.
Good answer.
I feel like if 4th edition came out now, it would be way better received in a like larger RPG marketplace.
Totally agreed.
And if it was called something else, Dragons and Dungeons or something else, I think people would still be playing it today.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. That's fair. Do you have a favorite Monkey Island moment or location?
For me, it's the chicken with a
with the pulley attached.
With the pulley in the middle.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, for me, all of Melee Island is just beautiful. Yeah. And I mean, that intro when you're deep in the Caribbean and the music kicks in and it reveals the island.
Oh yeah, dude.
And you play Sea of Thieves. For any Sea of Thieves players out there, the Monkey Island adventure, they recreate that like opening shot in game with the music. It's just one of the coolest things ever.
I was so pumped when they announced that, but I just haven't had any time. I just need to carve out like evenings for a whole week to dive into Sea of Thieves Monkey Island, because that's just the marriage of two things I absolutely love.
Yes, I totally agreed.
Mikey, if you need more content, I have another adventure called The Haunting of Deathlight Cove. And there it's like all ghost pirates on this like hidden pirate hideout. But if you look at the battle map, there's a part where there's like a little rope across an area from one treehouse to another, and sitting on a box is a little rubber chicken with a pulley in the middle.
That's incredible. And I actually did see The Haunting of Deathlight Cove.
Oh, nice.
And considered it, but basically it was something where I'm like, well, ghostly pirates and all of that. I don't want to basically spoil what I'm doing in the overall story.
Sure.
So actually, because it's so close to what I'm going to be doing in the main campaign.
Sure.
I will be stealing it though. I will be stealing a lot of that. For the
and it's like 50 pages. So you could not have digested that for one shot or whatever. You, Mikey, and Richie are 5th level characters in a medieval fantasy setting. What is your class?
Oh, like me personally?
Yeah. Like you get like D&D TV show cartoon style. You show up in Faerun or whatever. What's your D&D class?
I think Artificer.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I think Sorcerer. I think because I have pretty high charisma and decent constitution, and I mean strength and dex are a dump stat. Yeah, I think Sorcerer.
Yeah, Artificer for me because I like to build stuff, right? And I think it's fun, and I would want to somehow have the ability to fix the Artificer class.
If you had to choose an RPG setting to live in, which would it be?
Not Pirate Borg, sorry.
Please don't.
Yeah.
What a nightmare.
Not Warhammer Fantasy.
No.
Not Call of
No, I think that would be
Cthulhu.
worse, actually.
So can we do video game?
Sure, yeah.
If we're doing video game RPGs, I think I'm a big fan of the world of Warcraft, Azeroth. I think that'd be really fun to live in. And I'm a big fan of the League of Legends lore, their world of Runeterra with the show Arcane. I think that'd be a really cool city and world to live in.
Yeah. And I think that if we're going for TTRPGs, the One Ring, being a hobbit in the Shire,
That's
and
good.
having good seed cakes and, good drinks and good company and music, it sounds pretty amazing.
I mean, yeah, and if you get Avantris, you end up in Rivendell. Like, come on, that sounds amazing.
Exactly.
Night City would be cool too.
That would be cool in a dystopian sort of way.
Yeah.
It'd be pretty.
Is that
it'd be a fun
Cyberpunk
time.
Red?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Cyberpunk.
Yeah, I had the Morkborg Stockholm Cartel guys on, and I asked them, and I was like, please don't say Cyberpunk or Cyborg, because Cyborg is like, the city of Psy is like even worse. It's just like, ads everywhere you look, and it's just the worst version of Cyberpunk. But
That's terrible.
I would like you both to add an entry to the what's in the cargo hold of the Ship of the Dead D100 table.
I don't know why I'm thinking of this, but like a crate of like lamprey pies.
Lamprey pies.
That's something that they eat all the time in A Song of Ice and Fire.
For me, I would say a coop of ghost chickens.
It's one of
That's
my favorite,
good.
One of my favorite answers. Favorite size die.
D12 is underrated. It is like, it's chunky. It rolls really nicely. I like it. What can I say?
I would say, the percentile die gets a lot of hate, but after playing the Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game, that was a lot of fun, rolling a lot of D100s.
So you mean actually 2 dice. I love that. That's a great answer. Yeah. I mean, you could get one of those crazy 100-sided ones, but I really do like the percentile.
Yeah.
Favorite fantasy movie, TV show, or book? Or maybe even what's your crush right now,
I mean, I think that this is one of my favorite films of all time is Fellowship of the Ring. It's going to be the vanilla answer, but Fellowship is just a perfect film. The extended edition, of course.
I mean, wait, are you trying to imply that there is another edition that exists besides extended edition?
You're right. It is not, nothing exists beyond the extended edition.
If I got paid every time I had an opportunity to watch Fellowship, but they were streaming like the theatrical and I didn't watch it, I would probably be rich, like really rich, because it happens all the time.
Yep.
I'll go with, I'm going to say Arcane on Netflix, the League of Legends show, rhyming with my other answer because season 2 just got teased and I couldn't be more excited.
Favorite libation or beverage during your RPG sessions?
I'm very cool. I drink coffee and seltzer water.
Yeah, coffee and seltzer water. And if I'm feeling spicy, very rarely, a little bit of rye whiskey.
Video or computer game you've logged the most hours playing?
World of Warcraft, not even close.
Also, very popular answer on this program. Do you have a favorite D&D spell?
In terms of power, foresight. In terms of flavor, prestidigitation.
I will say, in terms of power and flavor, shape change.
Recent board game you've been enjoying?
Staying on pirate theme, Ahoy.
Ahoy.
By Leader Games.
I don't know this game.
Oh, it is amazing. Leader Games has a lot of very successful board games. Their most well-known one is probably Root.
Yeah.
Which is an asymmetrical kind of war game-esque thing with
I know Root very well.
Yeah. And so Ahoy is like a map builder pared down version of Root. And it feels very much like Root, but it's different. It's still an asymmetrical, kind of like a war game in a way, but every faction has their own goals and it's all nautical and pirate themed and it's amazing.
You had me at Ahoy, but not, Any upcoming Kickstarter projects or games you've recently backed?
Upcoming, the Dark Caribbean for 5th edition.
I will say I've seen some ads for Veil of Eternal Night.
Yes.
That look pretty cool, like Castlevania-esque D&D. So
I love that. Yeah.
I mean, I love Castlevania. So yeah, they really nail the theme. You're getting exactly what it says on the tin, which is outstanding.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the Castlevania Netflix anime. I'm like, except for maybe Vox Machina, it's like the most D&D show. He's like, oh yeah. It's so much fun to watch. Any final thoughts? That's all I've got, guys.
I just want to say, thanks so much for having us on. It's awesome talking to you as always. I am very excited to utilize a lot more of Pirate Borg into the Shroud over Saltmarsh. So there'll be a lot of fun little Easter eggs and nods and things in there. And so I'm very much looking forward to, teasing that out, and I'll let you know when I do cool stuff like that.
I love that.
So.
Oh, that's so much. I love talking to you guys. Thank you for coming on. What's the best place to find you guys on the internet?
You can find us on all socials pretty much at Legends of Avantris. That's Avantris. All of our campaigns are on YouTube. We stream at least once a week on Twitch. And thecrookedmoon.com if you want to pre-order our folk horror 5e supplement. We're accepting pre-orders for at least the next few months. So thank you. And Luke, thank you for being a friend and a kindred spirit on, not just all things pirate and nautical and Monkey Island, but also sort of, publisher / person in the industry that also is just clear that, you wear your passions on your sleeve and everything hits that bar. So it's been awesome chatting, and hopefully we can do this again.
Yeah, it kind of feels like you guys we're both the captains of different pirate ships, like sailing around the same tabletop role playing game community. We're like
same waters.
Screw the establishment. We're doing our own thing. You've been listening to the Ship of the Dead podcast. Email your questions, comments, and buried treasure tips to shipofthedead@limithron.com. You can support the program, join our Discord server, get early access to new episodes, and instantly download hundreds of battle maps, assets, and adventures at limithron.com/Patreon. Tiers start as low as $2 a release, and you only get charged when I make something new. Pirate Borg, my rules-light, rum-infested hack of Morkborg, is available now at pirateborg.com and retail stores everywhere. Ship of the Dead is produced by Limithron LLC, our audio editor is Matt Kepler, and our music is by Alexander Miller. For more, head to limithron.com.